today I'm reviewing Fable by Adrienne. We got this in the Fairy Loot box for last month, and I was holding off until I could do the read along, which I made a video for if you'd be interested in watching my thoughts as I read through it. But I also wanted to do a review in my more traditional style, which in case this is your first video of mine, I'll just real quickly go through the format that I follow, which is first is just a neutral summary. I want to briefly tell you what the book's about, that way you know if it's something that sounds interesting to you or not. Next are some kind of more technical details. That's the point of views, how many are they, and in what style are they, along with adult themes and other social complexities. I feel like those could be stumbling blocks for perhaps younger or less experienced readers, so I like to address those. The next two are hurdles that I think can affect everybody, regardless of age or reading comfort, and that's how detailed the romance and violence sections get. You might not want to read a book that has a lot of romance or that gets very intimate with the details, and I feel like the same thing goes for violence. So I cover those two, and then at the end I just give my opinionated summary, 5 thoughts that didn't fit into the other categories, or just generally if I like the book or not. That's what I'll be doing for you today. So for the neutral summary, without giving too much away, this is a book that takes place a lot on the ocean/sea. There's a lot of seafaring and deep sea diving. Fable was taught to deep sea dive early on. Fable's been stuck on Jabal for about 4 years whenever the book starts. And the crowd on this island is pretty nefarious, full of cutthroats and people ready to steal whatever you've got. So she's worked very hard to dive, to find gems and other things, to scrimp and save enough money to book passage to a city on the mainland named Saros. There she's going to look for a man named Saint and try and get a job aboard one of his ships. And of course there are a lot of surprises and other adventures along the way. The point of view is really easy. Since this is a young adult novel and pretty slim, Young really only sticks to one narrator, who is Fable, the girl that I described earlier, and she narrates the story in a first-person past tense. As far as social complexities or adult themes, I didn't really feel like many were addressed. I felt like there was the opportunity for maybe 1 or 2 things to be brought up, but I can understand how those themes might be too adult, so Young wouldn't have done that. But I feel like if I were going to try to put something that happened in this book in that category, it would probably be the tough love, I think is being generous, that Saint shows to Fable. Clearly he cares about her because he seems pretty tormented and upset about some of the things that he's had to do. But he did still elect to leave her on an island with no discernible help for 4 years, which seems just cruel. Why would he do that? When he's telling her about it, both when he drops her off there 4 years ago and when she sees him later in the book, he explains that it's just as much to protect her as it is him, because if people know that their relationship, then they might try to hurt her, kidnap her, or something like that. So he's trying to keep her further than arm's length away to keep her safe, but that ends up being very hurtful to her. But again, that's the most like adult themed thing that I could think of that happens in this book. It's pretty tame in that category. So now for the sections about romance and violence, and I'm going to try to keep my opinionated thoughts kind of out of this and just tell you what I felt like the worst parts, or I guess the most intense parts were in both categories. So for romance, it's actually pretty tame throughout the whole book. There are hardly whispers of romance at all until you get to the last 5 or so chapters in which Fable and her love interest do get together. There's a bunch of the kind of traditional YA flowery language about smooches that light their skin on fire. And I kind of thought that's all that we were going to have until they decide to spend a night together. Again, though, it's all kind of YA tameness and very sugary. I guess we don't even know that they had sex, but if you know what sex is, it's pretty easy to surmise that that's what they got up to, because there is just the mention of skin-on-skin contact, and they spend the night together. And I think they even say, and don't get a lot of sleep. So you could infer that that's what it is. I mean, as far as things go, that's pretty tame. For the violence element, it's on an island for 4 years full of cutthroats and thieves, and then she gets on a ship with a crew who are not what they seem, and then she meets up with Saint, who she was trying to find, who's known for being very cutthroat and no nonsense and all this. But for all that and all that setup about this being a very dangerous world, you have to be very careful. there wasn't a lot of violence really. I think the bloodiest part of the book is when she's diving and she gets a back injury. The coral cuts up her back really bad, so she's bleeding pretty bad, but she recovers, she's fine. There's another character that gets seriously wounded, but that kind of happens off screen. The real emphasis is only on him getting better, and so I don't think there's a lot of blood in that scenario. There are a couple disfigurements. There are some wounds that leave really bad and obvious scars. So I don't know if that would be a point of trouble for anybody. The main character, Fable, has a big cut running up and down her arm. And when there's the flashback where she talks about it, the emphasis is mostly on how she's feeling at the time, less about any details about the cut or anything like that. She's looking away, she's trying not to think about it, she's trying not to cry. So even that scene wasn't that bloody. Another character has a big burn on her face. We don't hear anything about the specifics of when that happened. We don't see that in a scene. We don't even hear Willa talk about it in like a reminiscing scene. Fable does say that she kind of knows why that must have happened and how it must have happened, but again, no real details. So this book seems pretty safe in the violence category as well. Alright, so now time for me to bore you with my opinions. The first two things that I thought of that I enjoyed about this book, I immediately had counterparts that I disliked. The first one is that I like the lack of romance. For the lion's share of the book, she is keeping people at arm's length. You know, first she's on that island full of terrible people, so it doesn't seem hard to keep people away and not form any like bonds of friendship or love or something like that when everybody's kind of dreadful. But then she gets on this ship full of people that it seems like she's gonna be friends with. She even says that it seems like they have a secret, so that kind of keeps them a little distant than they perhaps would be if they could be entirely honest with each other. And then while she's on the ship, she shares a few moments with one of the guys, and I'm like, oh, that's probably her love interest. But like not a lot happens. Even the things that like says like a shared book or something like that, I feel like as like an avid young adult reader, it's pretty easy for me to know that that's what's gonna happen next. But it wasn't a lot of the very stereotypical stuff or any of the stuff with flowery language. And then it kind of seems like she's not gonna see him again. But then she does. But then they have this like indirect conversation where they're like, we probably shouldn't, it'd be safer for both of us. But then they like immediately go back on that and smooch. And that section where they decide, let's romance anyway, is just full of the same sugary, flowery, young adult language. And like, I get it. That's the category of book that I'm reading, but it's not something that I love to see. So I was a little disappointed just because I really thought I wasn't going to have any of that. And then it showed up. The next thing is strong female lead. Fable is so strong. She's on that island fending for herself without any help for 4 years. She's diving. She has to hide her caches of gems. She has to hide her caches of money. And like spread all this stuff out so no one can take it. And even if they find it, they won't have everything. And so she has to plan, she has to be careful, she has to play it safe. But she's tough. She mentions a time or two where she's gotten injured and had to work through it or just suffer through it, but like couldn't pay anybody to help her feel better. Nobody was bringing her meals. And, you know, she talks about all this stuff that she had to struggle through. Then she gets on the ship and she still has some tough times. They don't take to her quite as fast. Again, they kind of have secrets. They're keeping her distant. Too, she's from a place that's known for dreadful thieves, and so they don't like that she's on the ship. It's a little tough because she does some things trying to win over their trust and is working to try and earn her place on the boat. So again, you know, she just has to show that she's tough. And then she gets to see Saint. She gets to that city she was going to, and their conversation doesn't go the way she expected, so she decides to drink. She doesn't know where her next meal is coming from, doesn't even, I think, know where she's gonna lay her head. She goes into a tavern, but there's no talk of her reserving a room. She just sits down at the bar and starts drinking. And that just is somebody who had to work so hard just to stay alive. That doesn't seem like a move that somebody went through that would do. It's really disappointing to see someone that I thought was like so strong and really was a strong female lead do that. Do that very unwise decision. I mean, I know she was emotional, and it's not like people can't have emotions, but she could have planned what was going to happen next and then drink because she was sad. However, the other girl that's on the ship, her name is Willa, she's like consistently a tough lady. The burn on her face that she doesn't ever talk about, just kind of glares through it at people. I feel like the weakest that we see her is like she has to sell a bubble that has sentimental value to her, but you know, she needs to eat. So she sells it. She's bummed about it. She talks to one of the other characters about it, but she's like, well, yeah, I mean, I don't like it, but if it had to happen, it had to happen. So she's tough in that instance. She helps Fable home when she's drunk. Like, she seems pretty tough the whole way through. And granted, she is a side character. We're not privy to her at all times like we are Fable. We don't know what she's doing all the time. We also aren't privy to her thoughts, so she might be putting up a brave face, but be worried or even making poor decisions that we don't see. But she's a very strong lady, and so I like that at least she was pretty consistently strong throughout the book. Next, I've got 2 likes and a dislike, so I'm going to sandwich the dislike in between so I can end on a like. So the first like is pretty broad. It's just, I loved all the sailing and the talk of the sea, and there were so many details about ships, about the rigging, about the different jobs that happen on ships, to when Fable free dives. It seems like such a small thing, but I am so excited that Young decides to include the detail of her preparing her lungs to hold extra oxygen as she dives. Literally every time that Fable gets in the water to dive down, Young at least writes a line or a mention about Fable going through her breathing exercises. And I just think that's such a fantastic detail to make sure that you're adding in. It really adds to the realness of the character and her situation. So I really appreciated that. And the sea's just beautiful. So the dislike, though, that I'm going to sandwich in between is basically every moment that she's on Jabal is not that big of a part of the book, other than to show that she had to be strong and struggled and overcame adversity. But there are just so many little details that bother me. Like in the first page or two, where we're being introduced to first Fable and then kind of the world as a whole, she's running to catch the ship that's left without her. It's Koi's ship. And she even mentions that, like, well, of course he's gonna try and do this because he's so tricky and crafty, and you know, he just, even though she paid him, he doesn't want to do what she paid him for, and that he's starting to shove off without her. And she also mentions, though, that she could have hired this other boat, but he's not as punctual. Well, as we read through her time on Jabal, Koi seems like a much bigger deal and like a pretty consistent adversary. Sure, everybody on the island is kind of rude and gruff and will probably try and take your stuff if they think they can get away with it, but Koi just seems so much more ruthless. And maybe that's towards everybody, but whether it's towards everybody or just more targeted towards Fable, if I had the choice between a drunk who might be late and a crafty jerk who will try and steal my stuff and maybe even kill me, I think I'd go with the drunk. Like, I think my personal safety would outweigh punctuality. So that irked me. And then 2, we get the detail about Koi, and I don't know why this is thrown in there, but where he's got, well, maybe part of the reason why he's a little extra ruthless is that he's got an older person to take care of, Koi's mom or grandma or something like that, but I think it's female and definitely older, but has to take care of somebody older than him and 2 younger siblings. So he has 3 mouths to feed at home that aren't able to contribute to money or food or anything like that. I don't know if that's an act to humanize them. I don't know if Koi's gonna come back later in like the next book, or but Fable doesn't even think about him for the rest of the book, much less him showing up. So what's the point of building him as a character? And if that is seen as an act to humanize him, like, I'm sorry, but like an attempt on the main character's life, and I don't care if you're taking care of your grandma. If you try to kill somebody, especially the main character that I'm supposed to put myself in her shoes, it's not enough to make me like you. And then just another kind of minor thing that I didn't like about her time on the island is it seems like most of her unfortunate instances seem to revolve around Koi, and I just think that that's not really truthful. Jabal seems like a kind of community where everybody has the similar mentality of, I'm gonna watch out for me. Not gonna watch out for my neighbor, I'm going to only watch out for me. In a place where that is the prevailing opinion, why do we need to focus on one person? Wouldn't it be more honest for it to be more anonymous than that it's different people every time? Because these people here are just terrible. But anyway, I didn't have a good time while she was on Duval, but I guess she didn't either, so it's whatever. But to end on a happy note, I was really excited about the end of the book. I've tried thinking hard about how I can say it with giving more details about why it's good, but not spoiling anything, but I'm having a really hard time, so I'm just gonna say that I was surprised with how the book ended, and it was really pleasant to be surprised. And I'm really anxious about what's gonna happen next. So if I had to sum up all my thoughts in one tidy package for like a too long didn't watch kind of thing, I would say that I feel pretty neutral about this book. To borrow from a podcast that I like a lot, I wouldn't kick it out of bed for crackers. I'm not completely neutral. It was better than true neutral. But it had about as many things as I liked as that I didn't like. So I probably would only actively recommend this to somebody who likes the ocean or sailing or diving. Like, if you like that stuff a lot, you might really like this. But otherwise, if you're given it, if you see it on a library shelf, if your friends are talking about it, it's not a bad time. I would probably have other recommendations for you before I would get to this one. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Fable by Adrienne Young. I hope that you liked the video, and if you feel like giving the video a like or leaving a comment down below, that would really make my day. But I just want to thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed